Our next presenter is a new friend of mine. Chris Jordan is an American living here in the Netherlands, and he's going to tell us about his language, whose name I'm going to pronounce correctly. Þéng?
Þuàn.
Oh, of course. I was thinking of the first part. Þuàn. All right. So everybody, give it up. Chris Jordan.
To begin with, the Þuàn state is not really in this world any more than Tolkien's world is exactly this world. And this world I'm about to tell you about is oversimplified. I actually tried not to have anything in this talk about the world, but I really have to, because first I have to tell us where we are. And we come from a continent I call Yebron, because I couldn't think of a better name. And we speak a sort of Esperanto because we used to have 7 languages, and they've all more or less disappeared. And we used to believe there was no other land in the world because it was all drowned in the flood, until one day a pirate discovered other islands. And eventually we discovered another continent, and at the tip of that continent you will find Þuàn state. If you look on the second page, you will see my badly drawn map. Very crude, but it gives you a rough idea of where everything is, and we are off the page, we are south of that map. Þuàn is a very weird language by anyone's standards, but it's particularly weird even by the standards of that continent in Dogo. I don't know much about the other languages. I only know a few names, one of which I can't even say very well myself. But Þuàn resembles them not at all. And furthermore, the people of Þuàn have pale orange skin. They look like nobody else. 3 main features of the language are that it's extremely isolating. On Earth, the only language coming close to that, I would say, is Chinese. Only with Chinese are all the words strictly separate. And the second thing, David, you've already been through this, you can fall asleep for this next thing. I've already explained it, but the grammar, I can tell you in 3 words, there isn't any. In the usual sense, we have no grammar, we do not conjugate verbs, we don't worry about verb control. We have no adjectives per se, we have no nouns. We have one part of speech, prepositions, and I'll get to that later. And you wonder, how in the world do you ever figure out what you're saying or what you're hearing? The answer is syntax. And that will come, well, actually that comes right now, syntax. In English, we have more than one way to write sentences. We can move the verb around. In Dutch, we have multiple verb forms. And right now, I'm drawing a complete blank on the example I wanted to give, so I'll give it later if I can remember it. But Þuàn is very strictly VOS. In English, I drink water. Actually, in Dutch, if I water have drunken, then have I water drunken. Dutch is a bit more flexible. With Þuàn, it's always drink water I, no other possibility. There is no other possibility because you know in the first part of the sentence, following all the case words, the next word will be the verb. The next part, it will be the object of the sentence, and then the third part, it will be the subject. Having no grammar means the syntax has to be very, very, very strict. And finally, the most interesting and yet most artificial part are the triplets. On that handout I gave you, I listed all the case words. Actually, I think I better define case words before I go on. The case words are the prepositions in effect. What we do in Latin by conjugating the verb, or actually by changing the ending of a word, we do in Þuàn by beginning the phrase with one of those words. You will see the past tense, I can make 3 distinctions. Present tense also, future. And I wound up with about 45 cases and counting. And these case words are absolutely necessary because they serve as little hinges. You begin with case, then you start talking about the verb. You give another case, and we know we're talking about the object, and then a third case, we got to be talking about the subject. So first we talk about drinking, then about the water, then about the one who does it. And if you've never made a language before, then please don't try anything like VOS. It bends my head even trying to think about it. If Þuàn were a real language, I'd have to admit, I speak it quite terribly. And now I'm coming to the triplets. I mentioned just now the case words are almost all organized in triplets. Quite logical. We have three distinctions for likeness, and they're all found in a triplet. The first is xie, and it refers to things which are in the same category but different, as in apples and oranges. Xie refers to things which are very much alike, but you still won't mistake them for each other. I look like my brother, but we aren't twins. And finally, Xiang is identical. Many triplets have that, as in basic, better, best. And other triplets simply have a bridge in the middle. For example, on my left hand I have gong. On my right hand I have gong. In the middle I have the word for balance, gong. Or another one I'll come back to is the border triplet, literally. Xia is both raw, bleeding, and barbaric. Qiang is both cooked and civilized, and finally, Qian is the border. And many people may be wondering how, in every 216 years, the largest dinosaurs migrate and come close to the border. During Duan State's first experience with these dinosaurs, it was extremely traumatic. And as soon as they were clear they survived, they made a definite point to improve their language. Presumably they were afraid that shortly they'd be all extinct. Quite a role reversal, isn't it? People extinct and not dinosaurs. And the third time, the language reform was done by popular consent because if you look carefully at some of my case words, some of them are a bit redundant. In reality, this reflects my mistakes. In practice, according to me, this really would reflect also the inconsistencies of language. But because the people want to have a very consistent language, they agreed to change it. On the other hand, triplet thinking has always been there, at least as far as they tell us in their history. They've always organized words like that. They tell us the triplet for falseness, changing, and truthfulness has always been there. And having triplets gives Duan the potential for a deep philosophy. Unlike Americans, they don't just say, is it yes or is it no? They allow a third possibility. They allow a word I can't find in English, so I'll use the Zen word "me," which essentially means both or neither, or rethink the question. That's potential. But as we all know, language does not really control our thinking. Language gives us the potential, but we can have the words and not use them. In English, too, we can make the distinction between it doesn't have to be yes, it doesn't have to be no, but in practice, in my experience, people really want a yes or no answer. People are more comfortable with two because it's simpler. And that doesn't mean the Duan are more complex in their thinking, it just means they can be. I mentioned about the language that they have no grammar, essentially. What that means is context is very strict. Sometimes you only know what a word means because of the use in context. In the example I picked is the word "bone." If I use it as a verb, I mean there are 10 of. But if I use it as an adjective, if it appears in adjective form, I mean manual, both hands. Context defines everything, and in the Duan life, context also defines everything. If this were a better speech, I would be giving examples now, but unfortunately this is not a better speech, and I think we'd be better for it because otherwise I'd be speaking much longer than I will be. But like with the Japanese, best example, everything they do depends on the context they're doing it. Third point was isolation. Duan is an isolating language, and it's rather weird, but they're also a very isolated culture. It's hard to say in this case what really causes what. And I heard people at the dinner last night speaking of the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis. And we could argue till we're blue in the face, does our language create our thinking, or does our thinking create our language? In my view, both answers are wrong because both are true. The language we learn influences our speech habits, but then we continue to use language, and then we influence our language by thinking about it. In English, we lack a plural form of the pronoun you. But where I come from, we sense the lack, and we created a word. We say y'all. Where will you? Everyone thinks that's bad English, but it works. It works perfectly. Tuan has a very limited number of syllables possible. When you look at the description of how you write it, you have only those letters, only the blends, only those vowels, only those endings. Every word has to be that. And I did the math for you. The result is 2,673 possible syllables. They have very little room to create new words. That's one consequence. But the other consequence is they really have a hard time borrowing foreign words. As a matter of fact, they can't borrow foreign words. One of the original peoples of Hidalgo that they met and who are now extinct, they call them fish watchers. We have no idea if these were fishermen, or if their native names themselves sounded a bit like twin men, or if this was just an arbitrary name somebody chose. We have no way of knowing what these people call themselves because Tuan cannot borrow foreign names. And because they cannot do this, this means their language is more isolated from other languages than would be if it were like English, which is very flexible. Tuan is so inflexible that makes it harder for them to really discuss things with other people. Our culture is one of the first they've even tried to discuss things with in 3 centuries, at least according to them. And another point I just mentioned, word change. I'm sorry, I'm really going all over the map, but this is how I think. You might wonder, how could people who can't create new words have created technology? Because when we create technology, we necessarily create new words. And the answer is, all the syllables are in theory have a meaning, but in the practice they don't always have a meaning. Some words have meanings that have been long since forgotten, and one word that has changed is the word for difficult to define. The word is gang. In the Tuan history of creation, gang is used when God created heaven and earth. But nowadays it means atomic energy. It has other meanings, and I confess I've forgotten them, as well as my notes on the way. And finally, we believe languages evolve. The Tuan do not believe languages evolve, and furthermore, they firmly don't believe in evolution. Partly this comes from the fact that they have actively changed their own language, but partly it's a profound belief that people do not evolve into a better thing, and animals will not evolve into a higher being. Yes, animals can change, but a species will not change into another species. They would argue that yes, maybe horses can evolve with different colors, but for a horse to change into another species, that requires active use. Like the Chinese, the Tuan draw a very strong distinction between nature and man. I mentioned the triplet for border, and I mentioned the word for raw is also barbaric, and the word for cooked is also civilized. This translates Chinese exactly, or at least that was the intention. The Tuan would argue the idea of things happening just by nature is absolutely absurd. They would point to the wildland north of their border wall and they would say, look at that, it has not changed forever. If things are to change, people must do it intelligently. Thus, evolution is morally, logically impossible. And I really brought this up because I expected a serious debate on this. If anyone wants to debate me, there'll be questions at the end. And I was going to draw some comparisons between China and South Africa. China also has language reform. During the reign of Qin Shi Huangdi, half of the existing Chinese words then were thrown out. Qin wanted to modify everything. He wanted everything to be standard. All wheels had to be the same size, roads the same width. Everything had to be uniform, and I'm out of time. And therefore I will apologize and let this end. Thank you very much.
How is X with 2 dots pronounced?
That's based on the Chinese transcription for places like Xinjiang, and I pronounce it Shen. Very sharp. I don't really speak IPA, so I made a system that could, in theory, be understood by an English speaker.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, first of all, you said commented on quality. No, it was a good presentation, a good speech, and I wanted to ask. You mentioned atomic energy, but on the other hand, disbelief in evolution. So, what tech level, what level of technology are the people at?
By our standards, they're a little bit behind us because they don't have computer networks yet. Nonetheless, they have machinery, and it's all eco-friendly because technology grew together with agriculture. In our language, we think of technology and agriculture as separate. They consider them outgrowths of the same thing. And peculiarly, they understand biology quite well, but they just refuse to believe that evolution can really fundamentally change anything. They'll agree it applies to disease, but not really to animals.
No, okay. You mean so they do see on the bacterial level, or they don't even have things like immunization?
Yes, they have that, and they believe, yes, viruses can mutate. I don't know the phrase for that. But when I say evolution, I mean evolutionary creation, the idea that a man evolved from lower animals. And they believe that monkeys were created, and so were human beings, and so are the missing link, the pug, half human, half ape. But they believe all these species were created fundamentally the way they are now, and they have not really evolved into other species.
All right, thank you very much.